Boston Veterans Memorial Hall, April 1985. The camera flashes were blinding. Eleanor Morrison sat in the front row of the packed auditorium, her arthritic hands folded in her lap, wondering how she'd ended up here. She was 70 years old. She should be home in her garden, tending the wildflowers that reminded her of Italy. Instead, she was sitting between two men who had every reason to hate each other. On her left, Colonel Robert Anderson, U.S. Army, retired. Age 65, silver-haired, still carrying himself with that Iowa farm boy's honest posture. On her right, Hans Muller, age 73, professor emeritus from Berlin. He walked with a cane, now his movements careful, his accent still thick after 40 years. Both men had been her patients in 1944. One wore an American uniform then, the other wore gray. General Robert Hayes, son of the man who'd saved Eleanor's career, stood at the podium, his voice carrying across the hushed hall. "We're here today to honor nursing sister Eleanor Morrison," he said. "Not because she followed orders during World War II, but because she followed something harder. Her oath." Eleanor felt Hans Muller reach over and gently pat her hand. On her other side, Robert Anderson smiled at her, his eyes wet. "This woman," General Hayes continued, "saved 412 lives during the Italian campaign." He paused, let the number sink in. 412 enemy soldiers. A murmur rippled through the audience, some approving, some uncertain. "And today," Hayes said, "we're going to hear how that impossible choice changed everything." Eleanor closed her eyes, felt the weight of the leather notebook in her lap, the ledger she'd kept 41 years ago, now worn at the edges, the pages yellowed. 412 names. 334 survived. 130 returned to combat. The numbers had haunted her for most of her life. Cut to black, title card. Anzio, Italy, January 1944. Flashback. Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 1923. Eleanor Morrison was 80 years old when she learned what mercy cost. It was a winter evening, snow falling soft outside the pharmacy windows. Her father, Daniel Morrison, was closing up the shop when the bell above the door jangled. A man stumbled in, factory worker, maybe 30, his right hand wrapped in a bloody, oil-stained rag. "Please," the man gasped in a thick Polish accent. "My hand, crushed, in the machine." Daniel Morrison moved immediately. "Ellie, fetch the medical kit. The big one." Eleanor obeyed, watching wide-eyed as her father unwrapped the hand. 3 fingers were mangled, the bones visible through torn flesh. The man screamed when Daniel touched it. "This needs a hospital," Daniel said gently. "No money. Please. No hospital." Eleanor's father was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. "Sit down. This will hurt." For the next 2 hours, Daniel Morrison cleaned and stitched and splinted that worker's hand using supplies from his own shop supplies he'd paid for that he'd never be reimbursed for. Eleanor watched her father work with steady hands and quiet kindness, talking to the man in simple English, keeping him calm. When it was done, the worker tried to pay with a crumpled dollar bill, probably his last. Daniel pushed it back. "Keep it. Feed your family." After the man left, Eleanor asked the question that had been burning in her throat. "Papa, why did you help him? He can't pay us." Her father knelt down to her level, his pharmacist's hand still smelling of antiseptic. "Medicine doesn't choose sides, Ellie," he said. "Pain is pain. Suffering is suffering. When someone needs help and you have the skill to give it, you help. That's all there is to it." "But what if he was bad? What if he was mean to people?" Daniel smiled. "When a man is bleeding in front of you, his character becomes less important than his need. You understand." Eleanor didn't. Not then, but she would. Milwaukee, 1933 to 1938. Eleanor graduated from Rush University Medical Center in Chicago in 1938, age 23, near the top of her nursing class. Her thesis was titled "Ethical Treatment of Enemy Combatants in Modern Warfare," a theoretical exercise that her professors praised for its moral complexity. "You argue that medical personnel should treat all wounded equally regardless of which side they fight for," Professor Margaret Flynn had said, peering over her reading glasses. "That's a beautiful ideal, Miss Morrison. But war has a way of making ideals complicated." "I know," Eleanor had replied, "but if we don't hold to our ideals in the worst circumstances, what good are they in the best?" Dr. Flynn had smiled. "You remind me of your father. Hold on to that principle, Eleanor. You'll need it." Eleanor worked at Milwaukee General Hospital for 3 years. Good years. Safe years. Then Pearl Harbor happened. Milwaukee, December 1941. Eleanor had a twin brother named James. Same height, same dark hair, same stubborn Morrison jaw. But where Eleanor was steady and thoughtful, James was all lightning and laughter, the kind of person who lit up every room he entered. James enlisted in the Army Air Corps 3 days after Pearl Harbor. "I'm going to fly bombers, sis," he said, grinning that cocky grin. "Going to rain hell on the Nazis." "James, you don't have to." "Yeah, I do. Someone's got to stop them. Might as well be me." They were 26 years old. Eleanor still remembered how her brother looked in his new uniform, tall and proud and so damn young. "Come home safe," she whispered when they hugged goodbye at the train station. "Always do," James said. It was the last time she saw him alive. June 1943. The telegram came on a Tuesday. "Regret to inform you that Second Lieutenant James R. Morrison is missing in action following air operations over France. Stop, letter follows, stop, missing. Not dead, missing." Eleanor clung to that word like a drowning woman clinging to driftwood. Her mother collapsed. Her father aged 10 years overnight. And Eleanor enlisted in the Army Nurse Corps. If she couldn't save her brother, she could save someone else's brother. That was the logic. That was the bargain she made with God or fate or whatever force controlled the universe. Let me be useful. Let me save lives. Let me turn this grief into something that matters. By August 1943, she was in England training for deployment to the Italian front. By November 1943, she was in Italy assigned to the 3rd Casualty Clearing Station near Anzio. And by January 1944, she was about to make a choice that would define the rest of her life. The Casualty Clearing Station was hell-painted in khaki and blood. It was supposed to hold 150 patients. On a good day, it held 200. On bad days, days after major German counterattacks or Allied offensives, it held 350, with wounded men lying on stretchers in the mud between the tents because there was simply no more room. Eleanor worked 20-hour shifts. Her white nursing uniform hadn't been white in months. It was permanently stained brown-red. No amount of washing could fix it. Her hands were raw from constant scrubbing. Her back ached from bending over surgical tables. Her dreams when she managed to sleep were filled with the sounds of men screaming. But she was good at the work. Better than good. Exceptional. She could perform field surgeries that most nurses couldn't. She knew how to use the new miracle drug penicillin that was saving thousands of lives. She could make life or death triage decisions in seconds, her mind cutting through the chaos to see what needed to be done. Major Sarah Brennan, her commanding officer, called her the best combat nurse I've ever seen. Eleanor didn't feel exceptional. She felt exhausted and afraid and desperately, achingly sad. Because 2 weeks ago, the second telegram had arrived. "Regret to inform you that Second Lieutenant James R. Morrison, previously reported missing in action, is now declared killed in action stop." James was dead. Her twin brother, her best friend, the person who'd known her better than anyone, gone. Shot down over France by German fighters, his plane burning as it fell. Eleanor had received the telegram on January 30th, 1944. That same night, she saved her first German soldier. February 1st, 1944, 2:00 a.m. His name was Peter Schneider. He was 21 years old, and he was dying of burns. The ambulance brought him in with 12 other casualties, 10 Americans, 1 British, 1 German. They'd all been hit by the same artillery barrage near the Anzio beachhead enemy, an ally wounded by the same explosion, bleeding the same red blood. Peter was the last one carried in. The medic who brought him was apologetic. "Sorry, ma'am. No, he's a kraut, but he was closest to our guys when the shell hit. Didn't seem right to leave him." Eleanor looked down at the young German private. Burns covered his face, neck, and chest, 2nd degree, maybe 3rd in some places. The kind of burns that killed you slowly over 3 to 5 days as infections set in your body, cooking from the inside out. Without expert treatment, Peter Schneider would die screaming. He was conscious barely. His pale blue eyes were squeezed shut against the pain. His lips moved, forming the same word over and over in German. "Mutter, mutter, mutter." Mother. Eleanor felt something crack in her chest. This boy, this enemy, was calling for his mother. The same way James probably called for their mother when his plane went down. The same way every dying soldier called for the person who'd first loved them. The military regulations were clear: German prisoners received minimal care. Stabilize them, keep them alive for transport to POW hospitals, but don't waste valuable resources on the enemy. Eleanor looked at Peter Schneider's burned face, thought of James burning as his plane fell, thought of her father saying, "Medicine doesn't choose sides, Ellie. Pain is pain." Made her choice. "Get me the burn kit," she said to the orderly, "and bring me the sulfanilamide powder." All of it. "Ma'am, he's German. He's a patient with second-degree burns who will die of infection without immediate treatment. Get me the supplies. Now." She worked on Peter Schneider for 3 hours. Cleaned the burns with meticulous care, removing dead tissue, applying sulfanilamide powder to prevent infection. Gave him morphine for the pain, precious morphine that was ration that American soldiers needed. Wrapped him in clean bandages, changed every 3 hours to prevent infection from taking hold. Gave him penicillin, the miracle drug so rare that most facilities only had enough for their own troops. Peter survived the night. At dawn, Eleanor sat in her tent and stared at her hands that had just saved an enemy's life while her brother's body lay cold in some French grave. She felt like a traitor. She felt like a healer. She didn't know which was worse. February 1st to 14th, 1944. After Peter came others, a German corporal with shrapnel wounds, a private with a shattered leg, a sergeant with a sucking chest wound who died anyway but died easier because Eleanor gave him morphine and held his hand. By February 14th, 2 weeks after James was officially declared dead, Eleanor had treated 37 German prisoners. She told no one. Major Brennan was too busy managing the chaos to notice. The other nurses were too exhausted to pay attention. The German wounded came in mixed with American casualties, and Eleanor simply treated them all. She started keeping a record, a leather notebook she'd bought in Naples, small enough to fit in her pocket. Every German patient got an entry February 1st, 1944. Private, Peter Schneider, age 21, burns second-degree face/neck/chest. Treatment, sulfanilamide, penicillin, morphine. Prognosis good. February 3rd, 1944. Corporal Franz Weber, age 28, shrapnel wounds legs. Treatment surgery, penicillin. Prognosis good. February 7th, 1944. Sergeant Otto Bauer, age 34. Sucking chest wound. Treatment morphine only. Prognosis deceased February the 7th, 1944, 11:30 p.m. Name after name. Life after life. Eleanor didn't think of it as breaking rules. She thought of it as doing her job. She was a nurse. They were wounded. The math was simple. But she knew deep down in the part of her that woke screaming from nightmares about James that it wasn't simple at all. She was saving men who would go back to killing Americans. She was healing the enemy, and she couldn't stop. February 20th, 1944. Dawn. Eleanor was changing Robert Anderson's bandages when the German attack came. Anderson was a 23-year-old corporal from Iowa wounded by shrapnel 3 days earlier. Good kid, honest eyes, reminded her a little of James. "How's it looking, ma'am?" he asked as Eleanor checked the wound on his arm. "Healing well. No infection. You'll be back to..." The explosion cut her off. Close. Too close. The tent shook, surgical instruments rattling on their trays. Then another explosion. Then the staccato crack of rifle fire. "Ma'am," Anderson's voice was tight with fear. Eleanor looked out the tent flap and saw German infantry advancing through the olive groves, firing as they came. A counterattack. The Germans were pushing the American lines back, and the casualty clearing station was suddenly behind enemy lines. Major Brennan burst into the tent. "We've got maybe 15 minutes before they're on top of us. Evacuate who you can. The rest stay put and hope they respect the Red Cross." "I've got 180 patients," Eleanor said. 40 of them will die if we move them." Brennan's face was gray. "Then they stay. You stay with them. Keep your head down and pray." She was gone before Eleanor could respond. Eleanor looked around the tent. 180 patients. 145 American and British. 35 German. 35 enemy soldiers she'd been secretly treating with the same care as her own troops. What would the Germans do when they found out she was about to find out? February 20th, 1944, 8:47. Captain Wilhelm Hartmann had walked through many captured buildings during this war. He'd searched farmhouses in France where enemy soldiers hid in cellars. He'd inspected abandoned British command posts in North Africa. He'd stood in the ruins of Russian villages looking at what artillery did to human homes, but something about this moment felt different. He stood outside the medical tent, hand on the canvas flap, listening. Inside, he could hear groaning, the clink of metal instruments. A woman's voice calm and steady speaking English. An American medical facility. Captured intact. Hartman pulled the flap open and stepped inside. The smell hit him, first blood, an antiseptic, in unwashed bodies, and that sweet, rotten smell he'd learned to recognize as gangrene. The tent was dimly lit by kerosene lamps, their light making shadows dance across the canvas walls. In the center stood a woman in a nurse's uniform. Her white apron was brown with old bloodstains. Her sleeves were rolled to her elbows. She was wrapping a bandage around a soldier's arm, an American soldier. She didn't stop working when Hartman entered. Just finished tying the bandage, then turned to face him. Her voice was calm, clear, unafraid. "I am nursing Sister Eleanor Morrison, United States Army Nurse Corps. This is a medical facility protected under the Geneva Convention. These men are under my care and they will not be harmed." Hartman stared at her. He'd expected fear, begging, panic. Not this quiet, absolute certainty. Then he looked at the patients lying in rows of cots around them. American soldiers in khaki, British soldiers with regimental badges. And there in a cot near the back, a German soldier, wearing gray, bandages clean and white. And there another, 3 cots down, and another. Hartman walked slowly between the rows counting. 6 German soldiers, 10, 15, 20. They weren't segregated. They were mixed in with the enemy wounded. A German private lay next to a Canadian corporal. A German lance corporal slept beside a British sergeant. And the bandages, Hartman noticed this immediately, the bandages were identical. Fresh, clean, professional. On a table near the nurse's work area, he saw metal identification tags scattered across the surface. Dozens of them. He picked one up. German, another, German, another, German. He looked at Eleanor Morrison. Her face was thin and tired, dark circles under her eyes. But those eyes were steady. They met his without flinching. "You have treated our men?" Hartman asked in heavily accented English. "I have treated wounded men," Eleanor replied. "All wounded men who came through these tents." Hartman's eyes fell on a leather notebook lying on her desk. He picked it up, opened it. Page after page of neat handwriting. Names, German names, dates, treatments, outcomes. Private Peter Schneider, Corporal Franz Weber, Sergeant Otto Bauer. He flipped through the pages, recognizing unit numbers, recognizing names of soldiers from regiments he knew. "How many?" he asked quietly. Eleanor walked to him, took the notebook from his hands, opened it to the last entry. 147 German soldiers, she said, treated between November 1943 and today. The tent became very quiet. The only sounds were men groaning in pain and distant artillery fire. Hartman looked at this American nurse who had saved 147 of his countrymen, who had used her enemy's medicine to keep German soldiers alive. "Do you know what we do to partisans who aid the enemy?" he asked. Eleanor met his eyes. "I'm not a partisan, I'm a nurse, and they weren't the enemy when they were bleeding on my table." Hartman studied her for a long moment. Then he said something that surprised both of them. "You will continue working, but now you work for the Wehrmacht. Do you understand?" Eleanor's jaw tightened. "I was already treating your wounded captain. The only thing that's changed is who's giving me orders." Hartman almost smiled. Almost. "You are either very brave or very foolish, Lieutenant Morrison." "I'm neither, Captain. I'm just a nurse." "No," Hartman said quietly. "You are not just anything." End part 1. Word count 4,000. Elements delivered, checkmark. Hook number 1, mystery box opening, 1985 ceremony. Checkmark, character foundation. Father's lesson, James's death, checkmark. Hook number 2, the first German. Peter Schneider, checkmark, James's death timeline. Clear, January 30th, 1944. Checkmark, count 37 Germans by February 14th, 147 by February 20th. Consistent asterisk. Climax number 1. Hartman discovers the ledger. Major twist number 1. Eleanor placed under German control. Hook number 3. Internal conflict. James versus Oath. Hook number 4. What will happen to Eleanor? Eleanor woke on February 21st to the sound of German voices outside her tent. For one blessed moment between sleep and memory, she forgot where she was, forgot that German soldiers now controlled the casualty clearing station, forgot that Captain Hartman had read every name in her ledger, forgot that she was technically a prisoner of war. Then she opened her eyes and saw the gray Wehrmacht uniform standing guard at her tent entrance. The forgetting ended. She pulled on her blood-stained apron and stepped outside into the cold Italian morning. Captain Hartman was waiting near the main medical tent, hands clasped behind his back in that particular German officer stance. "Guten Morgen, Lieutenant Morrison," he said. "Captain?" Eleanor would not say good morning. There was nothing good about it. 8 new wounded arrived during the night. German soldiers from the fighting at Cisterna. They require immediate attention. Eleanor felt something twist in her stomach. This was her new reality, taking orders from the enemy to save enemy lives. "I need to check on my American patients first," she said. Hartman's jaw tightened. For a moment she thought he might refuse, but he nodded. "Of course, but German wounded take priority for new admissions." "Medical triage takes priority," Eleanor corrected. "The most critical patients are treated first regardless of uniform." They stared at each other across 3 feet of muddy ground. Finally, Hartman said, "You are either very brave or very foolish, Lieutenant." "I'm neither, Captain. I'm just a nurse." "No, you are not just anything." Jaya. Eleanor made her rounds of American and British patients first. Robert Anderson was awake, his shrapnel wound healing well. "Ma'am," he whispered, "are they going to hurt us?" "You're receiving medical care, Corporal. Same as always." "But you're treating them now, the Germans." Confusion, not accusation, in his voice. Eleanor's hands paused on his bandage. "I was treating them before Robert. You just didn't know it." His eyes widened. "How long?" "Since late January, right after I got the telegram about my brother." "Your brother? Oy. He was a pilot, shot down over France, killed in action." Eleanor's voice was steady, clinical. "I got the official notice on January 30th. That same night, a German soldier with burns came in. I saved his life." Anderson was quiet for a moment. "Then, ma'am, why are you helping them?" Eleanor had been asked this question before, but something about Anderson's honest Iowa voice made her answer truthfully. "When you came in 3 days ago bleeding from shrapnel, do you remember what I asked you? You asked if I could breathe okay. Not where you were from, not what unit, not if you deserve saving." Eleanor met his eyes. "I asked if you could breathe because that was what mattered medically. When a man is dying on my table, Robert, his uniform stops being the most important thing about him." "But they killed your brother." "Yes, they did. Or someone wearing their uniform did." Eleanor's throat tightened. "And every time I save one of them, I wonder if I'm saving the man who shot James down. That thought lives in me like a knife, but I can't." Her voice broke slightly. "I can't look at the wounded man and see a uniform instead of a person. I've tried. God knows I've tried." Anderson studied her face. "My mom's a nurse, back in Cedar Rapids. I think she'd say the same thing you just did." Eleanor felt tears threaten. She stood quickly. "Get some rest, Corporal." As she walked away, Anderson called, "Ma'am, thank you for telling me the truth." The 8 German wounded were waiting in the secondary tent. Eleanor steeled herself and entered. The smell hit her first blood infection, gangrene. One man was already dead, she could tell from the doorway. The other 7 were in various states of distress. A sergeant with a sucking chest wound, bubbles of blood at his lips. A private missing most of his left hand. A lance corporal with intestines visible through an abdominal wound. A corporal named Hans Muller with a gut wound from shrapnel, intestines nicked but not perforated. Repairable if she worked fast. And a young man with burns covering the left side of his face and neck. His eyes squeezed shut against pain. Tears tracking through the ash on his cheeks. His lips forming the same word over and over, mutter. Mutter, mutter, mother. Eleanor's hands moved before her brain could stop them. She grabbed her medical bag and went to the burn patient first. A German medic protested the sergeant was higher rank should be treated first. "The sergeant's breathing is stabilized," Eleanor said without looking up. "This soldier has burns that will become infected within hours. Medical need determines priority." She began cleaning the burns. The boy, he couldn't be more than 21, opened his eyes. pale blue bloodshot from pain. Americanish, he whispered. Eleanor nodded. Yes, American, but also a nurse. And you're my patient now. He didn't understand her words, but he understood her tone. His rigid shoulders relaxed slightly. Danke, he breathed. Eleanor felt that crack in her chest widen. She moved next to Hans Muller, the corporal with the gut wound. Shrapnel had nicked his intestines, not a fatal injury, if she could repair it quickly and prevent infection. She spent 40 minutes operating on Hans, her hands steady, her mind focused. The intestinal repair was delicate work, but she'd done it before. Penicillin would prevent infection. He'd live. The lance corporal with the abdominal wound died despite her efforts. The damage was too severe. She held his hand as he slipped away, whispering what sounded like Greta. By the time she emerged 3 hours later, Eleanor had saved 4 of the 7. 3 were dead. Captain Hartman was waiting outside. You chose the boy with burns first, he observed. He had the highest chance of survival with immediate intervention. The sergeant was senior rank. The sergeant was going to die regardless. The boy had a fighting chance. Hartman studied her. Then he said something unexpected. In the last war, when I was 16, a French medic made the same choice for me. Eleanor looked up sharply. It was 1918. Hartman continued, his voice distant. The Western Front. I was a runner too young to fight, but old enough to carry messages between trenches. He stared at the olive trees, seeing something 46 years past. I was shot in the leg during a retreat. German forces pulled back, left me behind. I thought I would die there in the mud. He paused. Then a French medic found me. His name was Corporal Jean Dubois. He had a French officer bleeding out nearby, senior rank, important man. But he came to me first. Why? Eleanor asked. Because I was closer to death. Because medical need mattered more than nationality or rank. Hartman's eyes met hers. Dubois spent 30 minutes treating my wound. The French officer died while he worked on me. I lived. What happened to the medic? German artillery hit his position the next day. He was killed. Hartman's voice was very quiet. I have spent 26 years of wondering if Dubois made the right choice. I have spent 26 years wondering how many French soldiers I killed after he saved me. I fought through the rest of World War I. I have fought through this war. I have killed men wearing the same uniform Dubois wore. Have you found an answer? No, never. Neither have I, Eleanor admitted, but you continue anyway. What else can I do? Hartman nodded slowly. What else indeed? He handed her a document, official Wehrmacht stationery with typed German text. What is this? Permission from my commanding officer. You may continue treating all wounded under my supervision. But, he paused, I have requested a medical officer from headquarters to verify the situation. Eleanor's stomach dropped. Verify? There are questions about whether an enemy nurse can be trusted, questions about whether this is propaganda somehow. He chose his English words carefully. A doctor will arrive in 4 days, perhaps when he will investigate. Then he will decide your fate. And if he decides I can't be trusted, then you will be sent to a prisoner of war camp in Germany. Hartman's expression was unreadable. And these men will have one less skilled surgeon. Over the next 4 days, Eleanor fell into a surreal routine. She woke before dawn, made rounds, performed surgeries, changed bandages, gave morphine and penicillin and false hope to dying men. The only difference, half her patients now wore gray instead of khaki. Every night she updated the ledger. Hartman had returned it to her on the second dome. If you are to be judged, he'd said, the record should be complete. So Eleanor wrote February 21st, 1944. Private, Johann Weiss, 21, burns, second-degree face/neck. Treatment, sulfanilamide, penicillin, morphine. Prognosis, good. February 21st, 1944. Corporal Hans Muller, 29, shrapnel wound, abdomen, intestinal repair. Treatment, surgery, penicillin. Prognosis, good. February 21st, 1944. Sergeant Karl Hoffman, 34, sucking chest wound. Deceased, February 21st, 1944, 11:47 a.m. The count grew steadily. February 23rd, 156 Germans total. February 25th, 163 Germans total. February 28th, 172 Germans total. But the emotional toll grew faster than the numbers. On February 23rd, Eleanor received a letter forwarded from the States. Inside was a photographed James in his pilot uniform grinning at the camera. On the body, her mother had written, "I found this in his things. Thought you'd want it." That night, Eleanor operated on a German pilot with a shattered collarbone, the same injury James likely had when his plane went down. She saved the German pilot's life. Then she went to her tent and cried until she vomited. Dorothy Campbell, the other American nurse, finally confronted her on February 26th. "Ellie," Dorothy said, her Tennessee accent sharp, "you're killing our boys." "What? Every German you save, every Nazi you patch up and send back, they're going to turn around and shoot Americans. Our Americans. And you're helping them do it." Eleanor's jaw tightened. "I'm a nurse, Dorothy. Why? You're supposed to be an American nurse. I treat every American patient who comes through while giving the same care to the enemy." Dorothy's voice rose. "That uniform," she gestured at Eleanor's Army Nurse Corps insignia, "means you chose a side. But you act like you're above the war, like you're too good to pick a side." "I'm not above anything. You just what? Think you're Florence Nightingale. Think you can love everybody to death." Dorothy's eyes were wet. "My brother died at Kasserine Pass, Ellie, killed by Germans. And you're over here saving German lives, like it doesn't matter." "It does matter. Every one of them matters." "Then stop pretending you're neutral. You're not. Every German you save is a betrayal of every American who died." The words landed like a physical blow. Dorothy walked away, leaving Eleanor standing alone in the mud. Dr. Ernst Muller arrived on February 25th. Eleanor was in the middle of surgery, a German corporal with shrapnel embedded near his spine. Delicate work. Her hands were steady, but her mind was screaming. "Continue," a voice said in accented English. "Do not let me disturb you." Eleanor glanced up briefly. The man was in his mid-50s, silver hair, calm assessing eyes. The look of someone who'd seen too many operating theaters to be impressed. She went back to work. 45 minutes later, the shrapnel was out, the corporal was stable, and Eleanor finally turned to face the man who would decide her fate. "Dr. Ernst Muller," he introduced himself. "German Army Medical Corps. I am here to evaluate your situation." "My situation," Eleanor repeated. "Yes, it is unusual for an enemy nurse to treat Wehrmacht soldiers with such dedication." He smiled thinly. "I have 8 hours, Lieutenant Morrison. Let us make them count." What followed was the longest day of Eleanor's life. Muller shadowed her like a ghost, watching everything. He watched her change bandages on a British corporal. He watched her give penicillin to Peter Schneider, the burn patient from January still recovering. He watched her hold an American private's hand as he died, whispering that it would be okay. And Muller asked questions, endless questions. Why give Germans penicillin? It is an American drug, very valuable, yes. Because it prevents infection. That's what it's for. But American soldiers should have priority. Medical need determines priority, not nationality. And if you must choose between saving an American or a German, I choose whoever is most likely to survive with treatment. Muller made notes in a small black book. He interviewed patients. Eleanor watched from a distance as he spoke with Peter Schneider in rapid German. Watched Peter gesture to his healing burns, point at Eleanor, his face animated with gratitude. He spoke with Robert Anderson. "Ma'am saved my life while German soldiers had guns on her." "That's courage, sir." And he spoke with Hans Muller, the corporal whose intestines Eleanor had repaired. Hans was sitting up now, color returning to his face. He spoke earnestly to Dr. Muller for several minutes, gesturing occasionally toward Eleanor. Finally, 6 hours into his investigation, Dr. Muller asked to observe a surgery. A German private named Thomas Weber had just arrived with a shattered leg bone. The alternative was amputation, quick, efficient, conserve resources. Eleanor chose to set the bone with metal pins instead. "Why not amputate?" Muller asked as she worked. "Because I can save the leg. It will take longer. Use more supplies. He's 24 years old. If I can give him his full life back after this war, why wouldn't I? Even though he is your enemy." Eleanor's hands paused, just for a second. "He stopped being my enemy when he became my patient." When she finished, when Thomas Weber's leg was set and splinted, and his prognosis changed from crippled to whole, Muller was silent for a long moment. Then, "I would like to see your ledger." Muller read the ledger for 90 minutes. Eleanor sat across from him in the administrative tent, watching his face for any sign of his thoughts. But his expression remained professionally neutral as he turned page after page. Finally, he looked up. 172 German soldiers treated since November 1943. Yes, sir. Survival rate of, he consulted his notes, 81%. I haven't calculated. I have. Standard field hospital survival for wounded prisoners is 63%. You are significantly above average. He closed the ledger. Why moi? Why what? Why risk everything to save enemy soldiers? Eleanor had been asked variations of this question dozens of times, but something about Muller's genuine curiosity made her answer honestly. My father was a pharmacist. When I was 8, a factory worker came to his shop with a crushed hand. No money. My father treated him anyway. I asked why. He said, medicine doesn't choose who eats Ellie. Pain is pain. Eleanor looked down at her stained hands. I've carried that my whole life. I can't turn it off because there's a war. Every time I try, I hear my father's voice. Muller was quiet for a long time. Then he stood. I will write my report tonight. You will have my decision tomorrow morning. He left Eleanor sitting alone, wondering if she'd just confessed herself into a prison camp. February 26, 1944. Morning. Eleanor didn't sleep that night. She lay on her cot listening to wounded men in nearby tents. Some groaned. Some cried out for mothers or wives. Some were silent, the terrifying silence that meant either healing or dying. She thought about James, about Dorothy's words, every German you save is a betrayal. Was it true? She didn't know anymore. Muller found her during morning rounds. Hartman was with him. Lieutenant Morrison, Muller said formally, I have completed my evaluation. Eleanor set down her gauze roll, and Muller pulled out his report, multiple pages typed in German. My findings are as follows. Nursing sister Eleanor Morrison has provided medical care to German prisoners of war that exceeds Geneva Convention requirements. Her treatment protocols are professional and effective. Her survival rates exceed standard military averages by 18 percentage points. He turned a page. However, Eleanor's stomach clenched. There are significant concerns. The use of Allied penicillin on enemy soldiers raises questions of resource allocation. The integration of German wounded with Allied patients violates standard segregation protocols. Muller paused, looked directly at her. Despite these concerns, my recommendation is that Lieutenant Morrison be permitted to continue her medical work under Wehrmacht supervision. He consulted the report. Strategic analysis: in 4 months, she has saved 172 German lives, equivalent to approximately 3 weeks of output from a standard field hospital. Eleanor felt something loosen in her chest. Furthermore, Muller continued, investigation shows zero evidence that American or British patients suffered reduced care. All Allied wounded continue to receive full medical attention. He closed the report. However, I must note for the record that I do not understand this woman. I do not understand why she helps her enemies at personal cost. He looked at Eleanor with something that might have been respect. But I do not need to understand her. I only need to acknowledge that she is an exceptional physician. Hartman spoke. Dr. Muller's recommendation has been approved by Field Command. You will continue your work, Lieutenant Morrison. Eleanor nodded, not trusting her voice. But understand, Hartman added, this protects you only under German control. When the Americans retake this sector, and you will face questions from your own military. We cannot help you then. I know, Eleanor whispered. Muller gathered his papers. You are a strange woman, Lieutenant Morrison. But war is strange. Perhaps it takes strange people to survive it with their humanity intact. After he left, Hartman said quietly, Muller added something to his report he did not read aloud. What? A personal note. He wrote, I have seen many acts of courage in this war, but I have never seen such moral courage as that shown by this American nurse. She stands for her principles, even when it costs her everything. Eleanor's throat tightened. He's wrong, she said. I'm not courageous. I just don't know how else to be. Perhaps that is what courage is, Hartman replied. The inability to be anything other than yourself. On February 27th, Peter Schneider wrote a letter to his mother in Munich. Eleanor didn't see it. Peter was now in a German field hospital 20 miles north. But the letter survived the war, found in archives decades later. Liebe Mutter, I met an angel in hell. An American nurse saved my life when she should have let me die. She gave me her country's medicine when her own soldiers needed it. She changed my bandages every 3 hours, even though she was exhausted. I asked her why through a translator. She said, because your mother is waiting for you to come home. I live because of her mercy. Your son, Peter. March 1st, 185 Germans treated March 3rd, 197 Germans treated March 5th, 208 Germans treated. Each night, Eleanor wrote in her ledger. Each night, she added more names to the list of enemy lives she'd saved. And each night, she wondered how many would survive to kill Americans. On March 7th, she wrote in her personal diary, I have saved 208 German soldiers. Dorothy says I'm betraying our boys. Maybe she's right. Maybe every German I save will go back and kill someone's brother. Maybe one of them already killed James. But when that burned boy was crying for his mother, I couldn't walk away. I couldn't let him die when I had the skill to save him. Does that make me a traitor or a healer? I don't know anymore. March 10th, 1944, dawn. The Allied counterattack woke Eleanor not distant thunder, but close, immediate explosions that shook the tent poles. She scrambled outside. Hartman was already there barking orders in German. His men were evacuating quickly, efficiently. He saw Eleanor and crossed to her in 3 strides. The Americans are breaking through. We have perhaps 1 hour. What about the patients? German wounded will be evacuated. Allied wounded will be left for your forces. He paused. You will be left as well. I can help with evacuation. No, you stay here, you wait. He pulled a folded paper from his jacket, pressed it into her hand. My statement regarding your conduct during the occupation. You will need it when your military questions you. Why would they question me? Because you cooperated with the enemy, because you treated German wounded. They will want to know why. His eyes were serious. This statement may help, or it may make things worse. I do not know. Around them, German soldiers were loading wounded onto trucks. Eleanor watched Hans Muller being carried past on a stretcher, the corporal whose intestines she'd repaired. He saw her and raised a hand in weak salute. Peter Schneider was loaded into an ambulance, his burns now healing under clean bandages. Thank you, Captain, Eleanor said. Hartman shook his head. No, thank you, Lieutenant Morrison. You reminded me that even in hell, some people remain human. He extended his hand formally. Eleanor shook it. You are an extraordinary woman, Hartman said. In another life, we could have been colleagues instead of enemies. In another life, Eleanor agreed, but not this one. Hartman stepped back and saluted a genuine military salute of respect. Eleanor, surprised, returned it. Then Hartman turned and walked away, boots squelching in the mud, and Eleanor never saw him again. American forces retook the casualty clearing station at 9:15 a.m. Eleanor was standing in the main tent when U.S. soldiers entered, rifles up. Ma'am, you okay? Did they hurt you? I'm fine. The patients need... We'll get medics, but first Colonel Grant wants to see you. Eleanor's stomach dropped. Colonel Douglas Grant was waiting in what had been Hartman's command tent. Tall, iron-gray hair, eyes that looked like they'd never smiled. Lieutenant Morrison, I'm Colonel Grant, 5th Army Intelligence. I have questions. Yes, sir. You were under German occupation for 19 days. Yes, sir. Did you provide intelligence to the enemy? No, sir. Did you treat German wounded? Eleanor's mouth went dry. Yes, sir. How many? I don't have an exact count, sir. Estimate. Approximately 220, sir, since the occupation began. Grant's face darkened. 220 enemy combatants, patched up and sent back to kill Americans. I treated them because they were wounded. The result is the same, Lieutenant. Grant picked up a casualty report. While you were playing nurse for Nazis, 63 American soldiers died in this sector. How many might have lived if you'd focused on Americans instead of the enemy? Every American patient received full care, sir. None died from neglect. But they could have received better care if you weren't wasting supplies on Germans. Eleanor felt anger rising. With respect, sir, medical need determined treatment, not nationality. That's the problem. Grant walked until he was directly in front of her. You forgot which side you're on. He picked up another document, Hartman's statement with German writing and Wehrmacht stamp. Captain Hartman left this for you. Says you're a model of medical ethics. Says you should be commended. Grant's lip curled. The enemy is recommending you for honors, Morrison. How does that look? Eleanor said nothing. I'm opening a formal investigation. Charges being considered aiding the enemy, misappropriation of military supplies, insubordination. You're confined to quarters pending review. Dismissed. Eleanor saluted mechanically and left. Outside, the sun was shining. Birds sang in the olive trees. The artillery had stopped. It was a beautiful day, and Eleanor Morrison had never felt more like a prisoner. The investigation lasted 8 weeks. 8 weeks of Eleanor confined to a tent at Naples Base Hospital, away from patients, away from the work that defined her. 8 weeks of depositions and interviews and written statements. 8 weeks of other nurses whispering when she walked past. Colonel Grant was relentless. He interviewed every person who'd worked with Eleanor, examined supply requisitions going back to November, calculating exactly how much penicillin and morphine had been wasted on Germans. Compiled testimony from soldiers who'd been at the station during German occupation. His preliminary report was damning. Lieutenant Morrison provided advanced medical care to enemy combatants, totaling 226 during German occupation and approximately 147 prior to capture. Combined total 373 Germans treated between November 1943 and March 1944. Intelligence estimates at least 130 returned to active combat. Her actions, while perhaps well-intentioned, directly contributed to American casualties. The number would grow. By the time the Allies fully secured Anzio in late May 1944, Eleanor's ledger would reach 412 names. The brutal fighting in those final 2 months flooded medical stations with 3 to 4 German casualties per day. But Eleanor didn't know that yet. In March 1944, she only knew she might face court-martial. Major Sarah Brennan tried to defend her, submitted reports detailing Eleanor's exceptional care of Allies. It wounded her 81% survival rate versus the Army's 63% average. Lieutenant Morrison didn't just meet standards, Brennan wrote. She exceeded them. Not one American patient suffered because of her treatment of Germans. She simply worked harder than anyone else. But Grant dismissed it. Efficiency doesn't excuse collaboration. The word hung in the air, collaboration. Dorothy Campbell gave testimony that cut deeper than Grant's accusations. Lieutenant Morrison is a skilled nurse, maybe the best I've ever seen, but she couldn't separate her duty as a healer from her duty as a soldier. She treated Germans the same as our boys. I don't think that's right. When you wear this uniform, you choose a side. Ellie never chose. Eleanor sat in the observation room listening and felt something break inside her chest. Because Dorothy wasn't wrong, Eleanor hadn't chosen. She tried to stand above the war to be nurse first and soldier second. Maybe that had been her mistake. The investigation dragged through April, into May. Eleanor watched spring come to Italy, wildflowers blooming in bomb craters, olive trees, leafing out despite artillery scars. She read casualty reports from Monte Cassino and Anzio, wondered if any of those American dead had been killed by Germans she'd saved. The guilt was a physical weight. On May 12, 1944, Eleanor was summoned to meet Brigadier General Thomas Hayes, Chief Medical Officer for the U.S. Fifth Army. She walked to his office convinced she was walking toward a court-martial. Brigadier General Thomas Hayes was a compact man in his late 50s with kind eyes and surgeon's hands. He gestured for Eleanor to sit. "You've put me in an impossible situation, Lieutenant," he said. "Yes, sir." "Colonel Grant wants you court-martialed. Major Brennan wants you decorated." He picked up Eleanor's ledger from his desk. "I've been reading this. All 412 names." Eleanor's breath caught. "Sir, I only treated 226 during the occupation." "I know, but by the time we secured Anzio in May, your total reached 412. Hayes opened the ledger, flipping through pages. "Do you know our intelligence estimates at least 130 of them returned to active duty?" "Yes, sir." 130 enemy soldiers back on the battlefield. How many Americans do you think they killed? The question was a knife to the chest. "I don't know, sir." "Neither do I, but it's not zero." Hayes closed the ledger. "Here's what I do know. You treated 412 wounded men. You saved 334 lives. You maintained the highest survival rate of any casualty clearing station in this theater. You did it while under enemy occupation." He walked to the window. I also know you never once prioritized a German over an American. Never once failed to treat our boys. You just worked twice as hard to save everyone. He turned back. Medical need determined your priorities, not nationality. Correct? Yes, sir. Do you know the actual Hippocratic Oath, Lieutenant? Not the simplified version everyone quotes? Eleanor recited, first do no harm. No, the original says I will use treatment to help the sick according to my ability and judgment, but never with a view to injury and wrongdoing. Hayes sat down. You helped the sick, used your ability and judgment, never did it to cause harm. But the Germans I saved were your patients when you treated them, not your enemies, your patients. His voice was firm. The moment wounded enter a medical facility, they're entitled to care under Geneva Convention. You didn't just follow that convention, you honored it. Eleanor felt tears threatening, blinked them back. What happens now, sir? Hayes picked up an official document. I'm issuing new guidelines for Army Medical Corps. Effective immediately, all medical personnel will administer care based on medical need, not nationality. Enemy wounded in our facilities receive the same standard of treatment as Allied wounded. He slid the paper across. You're going to write the training manual. Eleanor stared. Sir, you prove the concept works. Now teach it to every Army nurse and doctor in this theater. Hayes's expression softened. There will be no court-martial. There will be no medal either too controversial. But there will be policy change. Your methods are now official U.S. Army doctrine. I don't know what to say, sir. Say you'll write the manual. Say you'll help us train nurses who can hold on to their humanity in hell. He stood, extended his hand. Say you'll keep being the kind of doctor this war needs. Eleanor stood shakily and shook his hand. Yes, sir, I will. As she left, Hayes called, Lieutenant, one more thing. She turned. The German military sent a message through neutral Switzerland. Wanted to formally acknowledge your treatment of their wounded. We couldn't accept it officially, would look like cooperation with the enemy, but the message is in your file. What did it say, sir? Healers exist even in war. He paused. They're right. Hayes smiled slightly. That you exemplified the Geneva Convention's highest ideals. That you reminded them Milwaukee, Wisconsin, October 1945. Eleanor returned home 4 months after VE Day. Her father met her at the train station. Daniel Morrison was 70, now his pharmacist's hands spotted with age. They didn't speak much on the drive home. That night, lying in her childhood bed, Eleanor had the dream for the first time she operated on a German soldier, saved his life. He sat up, smiled, put on a Luftwaffe uniform, walked out and climbed into a bomber. She heard the plane take off, heard bombs falling, heard explosions, heard James screaming. She ran outside. James's plane fell from the sky, burning. The German pilot she'd saved flew past, waving. Eleanor woke screaming. The dream came every night for a month, then weekly, then less frequently, but it never fully stopped. Eleanor took a job working with veterans who'd come home broken. She understood trauma in ways civilian nurses couldn't, but she couldn't escape the numbers: 412 treated, 334 survived, 130 returned to combat. How many Americans had those 130 killed? The question lived in her like a splinter. A package arrived through the International Red Cross. Inside, Eleanor's original ledger left behind at Anzio, somehow preserved through war's chaos. And a letter. Dear Lieutenant Morrison, my name is Peter Schneider. You may not remember me among the hundreds you treated, but I will never forget you. I was the 21-year-old private with severe burns whom you saved in January 1944 at Anzio. 6 years have passed, and I am writing to tell you what became of the life you gave back to me. I am alive. I am married now. My wife's name is Anna. We have a son born in 1948. We named him Daniel after my father. But when I hold him, I think also of the mercy that allowed him to exist. I must tell you something difficult. After you healed me, I returned to combat. I fought at Monte Cassino. I shot at American soldiers. I do not know if I killed anyone in battle's chaos, you never know. But I pointed my rifle at men wearing your uniform and pulled the trigger. This guilt lives in me every day. But I also know, because you chose mercy, my son exists. Because you gave me medicine when you could have let me die, there is more life in the world. You saved an enemy. That enemy became a father. Is that redemption or sin? I do not know. Perhaps both. I do not ask forgiveness. I ask only that you know your choice created a future. With eternal gratitude, Peter Schneider, Munich, Germany. Eleanor read the letter 7 times, then she sat at her kitchen table and wrote back. They corresponded for 8 years. 1958, Peter's death. Peter Schneider died in 1958, not from war wounds, but from a heart attack. He was 35 years old, 21 in 1944, plus 14 years equals 35, far too young. His widow Anna sent Eleanor one final letter with the photograph Peter standing with Anna and young Daniel, smiling alive. On the back, he had 14 extra years because of you. Thank you for my husband. Thank you for my son's father. Eleanor kept that photograph on her desk for the rest of her life. 1952, Thomas Weber. Thomas Weber, the private whose leg Eleanor saved with pins instead of amputation, sent a photo of himself dancing at his daughter's wedding. To the nurse who let me walk my daughters down the aisle, I am forever grateful. 1958, Hans Muller. Hans Muller, the corporal whose intestines Eleanor repaired, sent word he'd become a chemistry professor in Berlin. I survived to teach 2,000 students over 20 years. Your mercy multiplied. 1962, Hartmann's widow. Captain Wilhelm Hartmann died in 1961, age 59, from a heart attack. His widow sent Eleanor a letter Hartmann had written years before. Lieutenant Morrison, I think of you often. You reminded me that even in war, we can choose to remain human. Meeting you was the only good thing that happened to me in World War II. I do not know if you made the right choice. I am not wise enough to judge. But I know you made a brave choice. And the world is better because people like you exist. With respect and gratitude, Wilhelm Hartmann. Eleanor cried when she read it. Slowly, very slowly, the guilt began to share space with something else. Not quite peace, but acceptance. 1960 to 1967, teaching. Eleanor began teaching nursing ethics at Boston University. She used her own story anonymously at first, then more openly as a case study. If saving an enemy soldier leads to friendly deaths, is it still ethical? She never gave them an answer, because she didn't have one. Sometimes doing the right thing has terrible consequences, she told her students, and you have to live with that. Being a healer means accepting your mercy might be used for harm, but the alternative, becoming someone who can watch a person die without helping, that's not healing. That's just survival. 1967, the documentary. A Canadian documentary filmmaker researching World War II nurses found Hartmann's widow in Hamburg. She shared her late husband's papers mentioning the American nurse at Anzio. The filmmaker contacted the U.S. Army. Recently declassified records confirmed the story. Life magazine broke it. The nurse who saved enemy lives, 412 Germans, treated 334 survived. Was she a hero or a traitor? Eleanor, now 52, found herself suddenly famous. The reaction was explosive. Veteran groups split. Some called her a traitor. Others called her a hero. Letters poured in rage and gratitude in equal measure. Robert Anderson, the Iowa corporal, wrote, Sister Morrison saved my life while Germans pointed guns at her. She stood there fearless and told them I was under her care. I believed her. So did they. She's a hero. Anyone who says different wasn't there. The controversy raged for months. Then Peter Schneider's son Daniel, now 19, traveled from Germany to Boston. He spoke at a nursing conference holding his father's photograph. I exist because this woman chose mercy over hate, Daniel said in careful English. My father was her enemy. She made him human again. Because of that, I was born. Is that not what healing means? The media coverage shifted. Eleanor became a symbol of medical ethics, transcending war. 1975, the award. The American Nurses Association gave Eleanor the Distinguished Service Award. Some veterans protested outside, but inside, Eleanor stood at the podium. I don't know if I made the right choice. I've lived with that uncertainty for 31 years. All I know is I made the only choice I could live with. I was a nurse. They were wounded. I couldn't turn away from that, no matter what uniform they wore. Eleanor almost didn't go. She was 70, tired, her hands stiff with arthritis, but something made her accept the invitation. The hall was packed when she arrived. She stopped in the doorway, stunned. 7 American veterans she'd treated, 5 German veterans who'd been her patients. Dozens of younger people, children, grandchildren, standing with them. General Robert Hayes, son of the brigadier general who'd cleared her in 1944, stood at the podium. We're here to honor nursing sister Eleanor Morrison, not because she followed orders, but because she followed her oath. The veterans spoke one by one. Hans Muller, now 73, voice shaking. I am one of the 412. I have 4 children, 9 grandchildren. Because Lieutenant Morrison chose mercy over hate, we exist. A researcher stepped forward with a chart, a family tree, showing the 412 German soldiers Eleanor had treated. Of the 334 who survived, most had families, children who had children. Our estimate, the researcher said, is that Lieutenant Morrison's actions led directly to approximately 1,100 people alive today. The hall went silent. 1,100 lives, 1,100 futures, all because one nurse refused to let nationality determine who deserved care. Eleanor stood at the podium, opened her old ledger to the last page. She'd written a new entry that week, April 15th, 1985, 41 years after Anzio. 412 names in this book. 334 survived. 1,000 descendants. Was I right? I still don't know. Did I betray my country? Perhaps. Did I honor my oath? I believe so. All I know, I looked at wounded men and saw human beings. I refused to let war make me into someone who could watch a person die without trying to help. For that choice, I paid a price, guilt that haunted me for 4 decades. But looking at these 1,100 faces, I think perhaps I also bought something, a future that wouldn't exist without mercy. I am 70 years old. I have carried this burden most of my life, and I would carry it again. Because some things matter more than certainty. Some things matter more than knowing you made the right choice. Sometimes being human is enough. Eleanor Morrison, Lieutenant U.S. Army Nurse Corps, retired. When she finished reading, the hall was silent. Then Hans Muller stood and began to clap. One by one, American and German veterans rose applauding. Eleanor Morrison, who'd spent 40 years wondering if she was hero or traitor, finally understood she was neither. She was just a nurse who'd refused to let war destroy her humanity. And somehow that was enough. 1985 to 1990. Eleanor continued teaching until 1988, when arthritis made it impossible to hold chalk. She was 73, ready to rest. She spent her final years in a small Boston apartment, tending a garden where wildflowers grew, the same kind that bloomed in Anzio's bomb craters. Daniel Schneider visited every year, bringing Peter's grandchildren to meet the woman who'd saved their grandfather. March 15, 1990. Eleanor Morrison died peacefully in her sleep. She was 75 years old. Her funeral 5 days later drew more than 200 people. 12 veterans sat in the front row, 7 American, 5 German. All old men now carrying the weight of a war fought half a century ago. Daniel Schneider, now 42, gave the first eulogy. My father died when I was 10, but before he died, he told me about an American nurse who gave him medicine when she should have let him die. He said she gave him 14 extra years. I asked what he did with those years. He said, I tried to be worthy of her mercy. I think he was. I hope I am too. Dorothy Campbell, now 71, spoke next. I thought Ellie was wrong in 1944. I thought she betrayed us. I was wrong. She was the only one who understood what it meant to be a healer. She taught me mercy isn't weakness. It's the hardest kind of strength. General Robert Hayes flew from Washington. Eleanor Morrison proved that truest patriotism isn't blind loyalty. It's standing for your principles even when your own countrymen tell you you're wrong. She made us better. She reminded us what we were fighting for. The Military Honor Guard folded the American flag. There'd been debate about military honors for a nurse who treated enemy soldiers, but her service record spoke for itself. Hans Muller, now 73, leaning heavily on a cane, stepped forward, placed a single white rose on Eleanor's casket, saluted, hand trembling with age and emotion, whispered in German, Danke, Schwester Eleanor, du hast mir das Leben geschenkt. Thank you, Sister Eleanor. You gave me life. Behind him, 1,100 people stood silent in the spring sunshine, descendants of the 412, living proof that one woman's mercy had multiplied across generations. Eleanor Morrison saved 412 enemy soldiers. She spent 46 years wondering if that made her hero or traitor. In the end, it made her neither. It made her human, and in a world torn apart by war, that had been the rarest, most precious thing of all.